Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with us. You know how this works. We love to unpack really transformative ideas and look at texts and sources that really kind of turn things on their head a little bit. And today we're tackling a text that has shaped civilizations for centuries. We're talking about the Quran,
Mm.
and we're looking at a new book. It's called the Quran, God's Message to Mankind. It's the New Millennium Exposition by Pigam Mustafa. And this book really claims to offer a whole new way of understanding this really complex and often misunderstood text. And I'm really excited to kind of dig into this because, I thought I'd have some preconceived notions about the Quran just from, kind of cultural osmosis. And I'm joined by an expert today who can really kind of help us navigate these potentially groundbreaking insights.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with groundbreaking. What makes the new Millennium Exposition or NME, as I'll refer to it as we go along, so unique, is that it's not a traditional translation. It's really focused on conveying the core message of the Quran in a way that's clear and accessible to modern readers.
That's interesting. So it's not about like the literal word for word translation. It's more about capturing the essence.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Have you ever used a language translator app and got a result that was technically correct, but didn't quite make sense in the context of a conversation? That's what can happen with traditional translations of the Quran. The NME avoids that pitfall by prioritizing clarity and understanding over a rigid adherence to linguistic structure.
I see. Okay, so like if I'm reading and I'm just reading a translation from centuries ago, it might not have that same kind of nuance or that same kind of connection to the modern reader.
Right. And the way that Mustafa does this is really interesting. He's built this exposition on three key pillars: authority, accuracy, and accessibility.
I like the three A's of understanding the Quran. But break that down for me. What do those actually mean in this context?
Sure. So authority means that the NME is deeply rooted in the classical Arabic language. It's staying true to the origins of the words. Accuracy comes from consistently applying the root meanings of those words throughout the text. And accessibility just means that it's written in clear modern English that anyone can grasp.
I see. So it's like a bridge between the original text and the modern reader,
Yeah.
so that the meaning doesn't get lost in translation.
Exactly. And that bridge is built on a deep understanding of Arabic root rules.
Yeah. You say root rules, and I've heard that before, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Why are these root rules so crucial to understanding the Quran?
Think of it like this. Arabic words are built from these root letters. And these root letters carry core meanings. So for example, let's take the root letters SLM. From those three letters, you get words like salam, which means peace, Islam, meaning submission to divine law, and Muslim, someone who lives in harmony with those principles.
So you're saying that those three words are all interconnected by their shared root.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I never realized how much depth there was to just those few letters.
It's amazing, right? And this is where traditional translations can sometimes stumble. They might translate the same root word in different ways depending on the verse, which can lead to inconsistencies and potentially even misinterpretations. But Mustafa's approach ensures that the core meaning remains consistent, making the Quran's message much clearer and more coherent.
I see. So understanding these root rules is kind of like having a key that unlocks this deeper level of meaning in the Quran.
Precisely. And it helps us to see how different concepts within the Quran are actually interconnected.
That's really cool. But it also makes me wonder if the Quran NME relies so heavily on understanding these Arabic root rules, does someone need to be like a linguist to really get something out of it?
Not at all. That's the beauty of Mustafa's approach. He explains these complex linguistic concepts in a way that's easy to grasp, even for someone with no background in Arabic. He provides clear explanations and helpful annotations throughout the text.
It's not like I need to go and study Arabic for years before I can pick this up and really get something out of it.
It's exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like this exposition really could be a game changer for anyone who's interested in understanding the Quran, regardless of their background.
Absolutely. It removes a lot of the barriers that have traditionally made the Quran seem inaccessible to some readers.
Right, so we've talked about the mechanics of the NME, but let's kind of dive into some of the actual insights that it reveals. One thing that really caught my eye was this idea that Islam at its core isn't primarily about rituals, but is actually a socio-economic blueprint. Now, that's a bold statement. Can you tell me more about what that means and and how the Quran NME supports this interpretation?
That's a great question, and it's one of the things that makes this exposition so thought-provoking. Mustafa argues that over time, the true essence of Islam has been obscured by an overemphasis on rituals and cultural
So
practices.
it's like he's peeling back layers of tradition to reveal the original message.
Exactly. He's advocating for a return to the foundational principles of the Quran, which he argues form a blueprint for building a just and equitable society, and he calls these permanent values.
I like that term, permanent values. But what are some examples of these values, and how do they relate to a socioeconomic blueprint?
Well, think of values like justice, compassion, balance, and a strong emphasis on community well-being.
Mm.
These are values that transcend time and culture. And the Quran NME reveals how they're woven throughout the text, offering guidance for individual behavior and for building a society that prioritizes fairness and social harmony.
This is already making me rethink some of my assumptions about the Quran. But how does the Quran NME connect these permanent values to a socioeconomic system? Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. The Quran NME highlights the concept of zakat, often translated as charity. However, Musafa explains that its deeper meaning is more akin to a social safety net, or even a system of wealth redistribution, ensuring that everyone in society has their basic needs met.
Oh, that's interesting. That's completely different from the way I usually hear zakat discussed.
Right. It goes beyond just individual acts of charity and points towards a more systemic approach to social and economic justice.
So we've got this revolutionary idea that Islam is a socio-economic blueprint built on permanent values.
Hmm.
But who is Pagam Mustafa, and what makes him qualified to present this interpretation?
Well, his journey to creating the Quran NME is pretty remarkable. He dedicated over 30 years of his life to studying the Quran. And his background isn't just in religious studies. He also has a deep understanding of linguistics and social
So,
sciences.
so he's not just coming at this from a theological perspective.
Exactly. His scholarship is multifaceted, and that's reflected in the depth and breadth of the NME. And it's not just personal study either. He was the director of the Oxford Institute of British Islam and has contributed to prominent publications like Science magazine. His work has even been featured in the Sunday Times, which shows the impact he's having on contemporary understanding of the Quran.
It sounds like he's not just some guy with an opinion. He's got serious credentials.
Absolutely.
This is scholarship at its finest.
Absolutely. And that scholarship is combined with a desire to make the Quran accessible to everyone. He wants people to engage with the text on their own terms, not just accept traditional interpretations.
I'm really intrigued by his approach. Can you tell me a bit more about the specific features of the Quran NME that make it so unique and valuable? What would you say to someone who's considering picking up a copy?
Well, first and foremost, remember, it's an exposition, not a translation. That means it's not just about converting the words from Arabic to English, but about explaining the deeper meaning behind those words.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's about conveying the message clearly, not just being literally accurate.
Exactly. And because it's grounded in a deep understanding of the Arabic language and root rules, it's both authoritative and incredibly reliable. But as I mentioned before, it's also incredibly accessible. Mustafa uses clear language, avoids jargon, and includes helpful annotations that guide the reader along the way. He even goes a step further by challenging some of the traditional biases and interpretations that have sometimes clouded the Quran's true message. It's all about stripping away those layers to get to the heart of what the text is really saying.
It sounds like the Quran NME has the potential to bridge the gap between scholarly understanding and everyday accessibility, which is something I think a lot of people are looking for. But I have to admit, sometimes when I hear about new interpretations of religious texts, I get a little skeptical.
Mhm.
How does the Quran NME address potential criticisms or concerns from those who might be hesitant to embrace this new perspective?
That's a fair question. I think one of the things that sets Mustafa apart is his humility. He doesn't claim to have all the answers, and he actually encourages readers to engage critically with his work and to form their own understanding.
So it's not about blindly accepting his interpretation.
Not at all. It's about empowering individuals to explore the Quran with a fresh perspective, to ask questions, and to come to their own conclusions.
I like that. It feels more like a conversation starter than a definitive statement.
Exactly. And that open-mindedness is reflected in the way he presents the text. He doesn't shy away from difficult passages or controversial topics, but he approaches them with a sense of respect and a willingness to consider multiple viewpoints.
You mentioned earlier that the Quran NME challenges some traditional interpretations. Can you give me a concrete example of how this plays out in the text? What's something that might surprise someone who's only familiar with more traditional translations?
One striking example is the way that the NME handles the concept of jihad. It's a word that's often translated as holy war and has been used to justify violence and extremism, but Mustafa argues that this is a gross misinterpretation of the term.
Okay, that's definitely a hot button issue that I think a lot of listeners will be interested in. So what does the Quran NME say about jihad?
Mustafa delves into the root meaning of the word, which is closer to struggle or striving. He explains that in the context of the Quran, jihad primarily refers to the internal struggle against one's own ego and desires, or to the striving for justice and righteousness in society.
So it's more about personal growth and social activism than physical warfare.
Exactly. And he backs up this interpretation with a thorough analysis of the relevant verses, showing how the traditional translation of holy war simply doesn't fit the context.
That's fascinating. It really shows how much our understanding of a text can be influenced by the way it's translated. I'm starting to see why this exposition is causing such a stir.
It's definitely a thought-provoking work that has the potential to reshape the way people view the Quran, and I think that's exactly what Mustafa was hoping to achieve.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the mechanics of the Quran NME to its potential impact on our understanding of Islam. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about Mustafa's call for readers to engage critically with his work.
Hmm.
What advice would you give to someone who's picking up the Quran NME for the first time? How can they get the most out of this experience?
I would say approach it with an open mind and a willingness to question your assumptions. Don't be afraid to take notes, highlight passages that resonate with you, and even disagree with Mustafa's interpretations.
So treat it as a starting point for your own exploration, not as the final word.
Exactly. Remember, understanding the Quran is a lifelong journey, and the NME is a valuable tool that can help you along that path. It's a way to engage with the text in a fresh and meaningful way, and ultimately to deepen your understanding of this complex and beautiful book.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect way to encapsulate the spirit of this deep dive. It's all about going beyond the surface, challenging our preconceptions, and embracing the joy of discovery. For our listeners who are ready to embark on their own journey with the Quran NME, where can they find a copy?
You can find more information about the Quran NME, including how to get a copy, at signet.co.uk. I highly recommend checking it out.
We'll be sure to include that link in the show notes. And remember, as Pegam Mustafa himself says, grab a copy of the Quran. New Millennium Exposition, reflect on its words and explore its meanings.
It's a powerful invitation, and one that I think is worth accepting.
You know, this conversation has really sparked my curiosity, and I have a feeling our listeners are feeling the same way. If the Quran NME can challenge us to rethink our understanding of a text as influential as the Quran, what other long-held beliefs or assumptions might benefit from a similar re-examination? What other perspectives are we missing out on because we're clinging to outdated interpretations?
That's a fantastic question, and one that I think we should all be asking ourselves. In a world that's constantly evolving, it's crucial that we remain open to new ideas and perspectives, even when they challenge our comfort zones.
I couldn't agree more. And sometimes all it takes is one book, one conversation, or one deep dive to completely shift our understanding of the world. So to our listeners, I would say don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge the status quo, and to keep seeking out those transformative ideas that have the power to reshape our perspectives.
Well said. It's that curiosity and that willingness to question that keeps us moving forward, both individually and as a society.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into the Quran NME.
Yeah, but before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. You know, we've been talking about challenging assumptions and embracing new perspectives, and it makes me wonder, what if we applied that same principle to our own lives? What long-held beliefs or habits are we clinging to that might no longer be serving us? What would it look like to approach our own personal narratives with the same kind of curiosity and open-mindedness that Mustafa brought to his study of the Quran?
That's a powerful question to ponder. And perhaps that kind of self-reflection could lead to some truly transformative discoveries.
Indeed. So until next time, keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and those deep dives going.
And remember to check out signet.co.uk for more information on the Quran NME. It's a resource that'll keep you thinking long after you finish reading it. Until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deeper.